I'll just welcome everyone. My name is Renee, and I'm a Global Voices Metcalf intern here at International House. The mission of International House is to enable students and scholars from around the world to live and learn together in a diverse community that builds lifelong qualities of leadership, respect, and friendship. Founded in 1932 by John D. Rockefeller Jr., International House of Chicago is today one of 20 members of the International House's worldwide network. In addition to supporting the graduate student community through our Graduate Commons program, International House also serves the greater Chicago community as a cultural and intellectual center for a wide array of programs. Close to 100 public programs are held each year at International House through the Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series, and in 2020, we created new globally focused programs and community outreach and engagement activities that continue to foster diversity of thought and experience virtually and through online gatherings. The Global Voices Performing Arts and Lecture Series includes music and cultural performances, outreach programs with Chicago area international organizations, collaborations with foreign consulates, and forums and debates led by distinguished guest speakers, including our guests for today's program, that we are so pleased to co-sponsor with the Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Yxta Murray is a novelist, art critic, playwright, and law professor. She has won a Whiting Award, an Art Writers Grant, and has been named a fellow at the Huntington Library for her work on radionuclide contamination in Simi Valley, California. The author of 9 books, her most recent is the novel Art is Everything, a funny, idiosyncratic, and propulsive portrait of a Chicana artist as a woman on the margins. In her novel, LA native Amanda Ruiz is a successful performance artist who is madly in love until everything starts to fall apart when her girlfriend's biological clock begins beeping, Amanda's father dies, and she endures a sexual assault. Written as a series of web posts, social media essays, rejected Yelp reviews, and smug mug streams of consciousness that merge volcanic confession with eagle-eyed art criticism, Art is Everything shows us the painful but joyous development of a mid-career artist whose world implodes just as she has a breakthrough. Gregory Fraser is the author of 4 poetry collections. His poems have appeared in journals including The New Yorker, The Paris Review, and Plowshares. The recipient of grants from the NEA and the Guggenheim Foundation, Fraser teaches at the University of West Georgia. His most recent work, Little Armageddon, is made up of everyday explorations, the small explosions of life, family, and ordinary survival. Fraser writes at eye level, detailing the experiences of fatherhood, love, and the quiet of daily life poised at the brink of abrupt upheaval. These poems balance imagination and truth-telling with rich verse that brings the reader's ear closer to the quiet and how intense it truly is. Both authors are going to share some excerpts with us now, and both books are available to purchase from Seminary Co-op Bookstores. Following the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions, so please submit those via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Now, please welcome Yxta Murray and Gregory Fraser.
Hey everybody, this is Yxta and Greg.
Thanks for having us.
We're so excited to be here with you today. Thank you to Seminary Co-op. Thank you to Northwestern University Press, who has published both of us. Thank you to Olivia Aguilar, our amazing publicist. Anything else, Greg, that I'm?
No, I'm doing great.
Okay, super. So the way we're going to run this is that we're going to do a read of maybe around 15 minutes a piece. And then Greg and I are going to get into it. And then we're going to, then we're going to take questions from the audience. And we'll also have an engagement with Seminary Co-op. And Renee, in fact, might be asking some of those questions. So we're super excited. I'm going to begin reading from my novel, as Renee has already beautifully described it. Art is everything. Look at this incredible design. I don't know, my ring light, my Kim Kardashian ring light, which I recommend to everyone on Zoom, is kind of flashing with this. There we go. Look at that.
Great.
Pretty good, pretty graphic, right? Art is everything. So I'm going to read, this is a book of abstracts, not abstracts, but kind of short stories and fragments of the kind that we write every day on social media, but they gain force and they gain connection until they ultimately form a life story. And Renee was already kind enough to describe what the novel is about. So I'm going to read from a story in the novel called Private Language. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what inspired this story, which is so the way the novel works is the protagonist is an artist, a performance artist, who slowly becomes an art critic. And I'm not a performance artist, I'm a law professor, but I slowly became an art critic over a period of about 3 or 4 years. And so each of the pieces, or almost all of the pieces in the novel, touch on the work of a living or deceased artist who actually exist. The protagonist herself is fictional, her relationships are fictional, but the artists themselves are real. And so I'd say in about 2016, so I live in Los Angeles, as does Amanda Ruiz, my protagonist. And I went to the Hammer Museum, which is this incredible museum here in LA. And they were having a kind of festival with a bunch of artists sitting around and showing off their wares. So it was a little bit of a kind of a flea market for art, as well as an art show. And I ran into this artist who I didn't know, and her name is Lindsay Tunkel. And she was there, and she had made all of these crazy like tarot cards or vision cards that were based on the apocalypse. And I sat down with her and she read my apocalyptic future. I was just having the time of my life. And I got really into the art of Lindsay Tunkel, which her last name is Tunkl. And I'm just gonna write that in because, Lindsay Tunkel, gotta give the sister her props. And so I wound up looking her up and looking at all of her work. And a lot of her work deals with alienation. And my favorite piece of hers is this piece called Is This What Feeling Feels Like? Which is a video piece where she sings the Dolly Parton, Whitney Houston song, I Will Always Love You, while drowning herself in a bowl of water. So you have to love it. And I wound up thinking about the ways in which Lindsay Tunkel's art really communicates our inability to communicate with other people. And that led me to a lot of thoughts, including, and I'm just going to make a brief reference to the philosophy of Ludwig Wittgenstein and his concept of private language, which again is the title of this story. And Wittgenstein had this idea that sometimes we speak in languages that are decodable only to ourselves and that can't be translated to other people. And so that kind of laid out some of the ideas for this story. So I'm going to read with my remaining 11 minutes. I'm just going to read some parts of private language. And so it begins with the following explainer in brackets. Vimeo comment number 1 that I posted to Lindsay Tunkel's Is This What Feeling Feels Like? On June 30th, 2018. This video features the performance artist Lindsay Tunkel singing I Will Always Love You while drowning herself in a bowl filled with water. Here we go. A person who wants to be destroyed by love is normal. The human wish to be ravished, despite its bearer's avowed feminist principles and self-possessed public persona, does not present an anomaly. At rare yet foreseeable intervals, erotic desire will offer most mortals an expensive, all-inclusive trip to a magical land where they will engage in mutually confusing flagellations with other reasonable people who are similarly, if temporarily, afflicted. So now, it is not strange to want to be bent painfully over a headboard while wailing with happiness. Even famous people like Herman Melville aspired to be slayed like a babbling lamb. Indeed, this ambition proves so common that it often crawls to the depths of banality. Maybe Melville wrote the great Moby Dick about Nathaniel Hawthorne, but think about the thousands of cliched flamed films that have been made in passion's name. Desiring another person to drink from your flagon of life is a well-worn theme in the history of love. What is strange is articulating this longing in language. Grab my ass, pull my hair, harder, goes the mantra. Spank me, say my name, goes another. Brandon is a 34-year-old corporate lawyer that I met at Ralph's. He is imposingly tall and possesses buoyant pectoral muscles. I am a 38-year-old former performance artist, an aspiring writer, and now a platform strategist for Snapchat. That is until Hadar comes back from baby leave. Brandon is half Chinese and half Peruvian and likes Star Wars prequels. I'm a bisexual Chicana with large eyes and sturdy legs. We've been dating for about 4 months. When I visited Brandon's 2-bedroom condominium in Culver City tonight, I arrived at its walnut parquet foyer ready to talk. I had been reading Wittgenstein's Late Philosophy on the metro and wanted to ask Brandon about his thoughts on indeterminacy. But then I saw his blue-veined biceps and bloodshot aura of overwork, and I became incredibly excited. "Hi, you look really pretty," he said, backing into the living room as I threw my recycled canvas Snapchat work bag to the ground and tore at his shirt buttons. "Babe," he said, "babe, whoa, this is so exciting, but hold on, wait." Plop, we fell on the sofa, which is covered in tweedy wool. "I am holding on. I am waiting a minute," I gasped back until I heard myself yelling, "Take me now, you monster. Love me like a stevedore. Make me beg." "Oh my God," Brandon said. Okay. I think I love Brandon a lot. "What's a stevedore again?" Brandon asked afterwards. We cuddled in his queen-sized bed in his small blue-walled bedroom with its transom window. "It sounds like something out of Moby Dick." "It's a figure of speech," I said, stroking his arm hairs. "Not one that I ever heard." Brandon pursed his lips to the far right side, as if his mouth were running away from something. "It's a compliment," I laughed. Brandon lay on his back and looked at the ceiling with eyes that kept widening. "Do I have sex like a postal worker?" "What do you mean, like homicidal?" I asked. "No, like boring," he said. I stretched out my legs. "Nah, you have sex like a lawyer." Brandon is a lawyer, but I immediately understood my mistake. "A really amazing lawyer," I said, "an ACLU person who fights for justice and stuff like that." Jesus. Brandon rolled over and closed his eyes and stopped talking. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg," I said. "That's good, right?" "I do mergers, Amanda," Brandon said, his voice muffled under the blanket. Now he's asleep. I'm awake, web surfing. When Brandon started snoring around midnight, I padded out to the living room and retrieved my bag, which contained my Wittgenstein and my laptop. I returned to bed and turned on the small white lamp on the stand next to me. I took out my paperback copy of Philosophical Investigations and read until I reached the last page. After that, I leaned over and whispered into Brandon's ear. "You have sex like a superhero," I said. He remained unconscious. "I am fanatically in love with you," I barely breathed. Still no response. "I want you to tie me up like a Victorian femme fatale and you're an evil villain with a mustache and a top hat." I said. "What?" he said. "You're dreaming," I said. Brandon fell back asleep. I turned off the lamp. I tried to sleep too. When that didn't work, I dug through my bag again and this time fished out my laptop. I opened my computer and balanced it on my knees. I started looking up feminist art videos on Vimeo, which is one of my favorite distractions during uneasy times. After a while, I found the work of Lindsay Tunkel. It's 3:01 in the morning. You've likely never heard of Lindsay Tunkel. You probably found this Vimeo page in the same way that I did, which is to say on accident. According to her website's CV bio section, Lindsay Tunkel graduated from CalArts with a BFA in 2010, and as of this writing, is attempting to complete an MFA in studio practice and an MA in visual and critical studies at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. From her videos on Vimeo and her still shots on her website, we can see that Lindsay Tunkel is a white woman in her 20s. She has long dark hair with streaks of early gray in it. She also has a big silver lip piercing and bears a metal stud below her left eye, which seems painful. Lindsay Tunkel is pretty and large framed with fleshy arms and formidable breasts and thighs. Lindsay Tunkel has made a series of conceptual art perfumes based on the apocalypse. One of the perfumes is called Tsunami, and another is called Nuclear Blast. They do not appear to be available for purchase on her website and doubtlessly smell bad. Lindsay Tunkel actually has the word Holocene tattooed on the inside of her lower lip as a memento mori. She is in mourning for the Holocene, which has been replaced by the apocalyptic era of the Anthropocene, the age of global warming and atomic annihilation. In 2010, Tunkel took a self-portrait. In this photograph, she sticks out her lower lip so you can read Holocene on her mouth's shiny underside. She made this image into a 36 by 48 print, which also does not seem purchasable from her website. The same year that she made Holocene, Lindsay Tunkel executed a performance called This Is How the iPhone Didn't Save My Life. This Is How the iPhone Didn't Save My Life consists of Tunkel sending plaintive text messages to a lover who never replied to her even once, despite the fact that she sent those text messages while driving across California to reach her, him, or them in the middle of the night. I love you, and I'm not ready for this to be over, she wrote. I'm not leaving until you tell me that you're not coming. This is all very good, but Lindsay Tunkel's best work product may be a short video that she posted on this Vimeo page in 2014. It's titled, Is This What Feeling Feels Like? First attempt. In Is This What Feeling Feels Like? Lindsay Tunkel wears a blue dress and her dark hair loose. In a wide shot, we see her walk into a white room that hosts a white table with the white enamel bowl on it. The bowl brims with water. Lindsay stands before the table and the bowl and stretches out her arms. She begins to yell sing the Dolly Parton Whitney Houston hit, I Will Always Love You, and periodically dunk her head into the enamel bowl, continuing to screamingly sing while her head remains underwater. Lindsay Tunkel sings, I will always love you, and then jams her head under the water, drowning and hollering. This video lasts for 1 minute and 51 seconds and has been played 16 times, mostly by me. Except for the comments that I am now writing, Is This What Feeling Feels Like? First attempt has elicited 0 comments. It has not been shared with anyone. It has not been liked by anyone or included in any collections. Lindsay Tunkel's work is a study of human solitude. Tunkel craves a whole and healed earth, but sees only destruction and death. She loves, but remains apart. She adores, but is drowning. She cries out for union with her beloved, but feels like she is dying. Lindsay Tunkel is alone. She is abandoned as a human on a dying planet, deserted as a woman in an affectionless world, and is also forsaken as an unliked and uncommented on artist. Lindsay Tunkel's loneliness dooms her to speak in what Ludwig Wittgenstein once referred to as a private language. And that's the reading. Oh. Perfect timing.
That was terrific.
Thank you. And now I'm so excited to hand the mic to Greg Fraser, who is a genius, and he's going to bathe us in beauty with his amazing poems.
I don't
All
know.
right.
After that, that's a tough act to follow.
God, you're going to be so good. We're so excited.
I love how you the selection you made was so precise, to end it where you ended it. It was almost poetic because you kind of detailed and illustrated, and then by the end you start to deliver meaning, and then you're just kind of like going into this archaeological dig into loneliness, and it was just gorgeous, really well chosen. And for those who haven't read the whole novel, it's a kind of gem of a selection, because it really does speak to a lot of the other moves in the book. You know, it's a book that just resurrects a lot of fractured lives, but also kind of shadowed and hidden lives. And I think that's the great beauty of it. You really just shine the light on folks who, you know, have been abandoned in a way by maybe the just overabundance of postmodernity. You know, there's like their imaginations are so rich and alive, and they're just combining all of these images and ideas, and just the signs are flying all over the place. But in that world too, there's no way to be seen on some level. There's no way to get noticed or to have a response, an audience. And what the book does is really touches on those moments of erasure. It's profound.
Greg, you're blowing my mind. You're the most generous of authors.
Straight up off the top of my head. That was great.
Thank you. Thank you. So excited to hear you.
Okay, well, listening to Yxta read, I realize I need to kind of step up my animation game, you know? I mean, God, what am I supposed to do? I gotta read these poems off a sheet. It's gonna be horrible. I'll give it a shot. Thank you all for coming. And I've got 6 poems here. Here's my book cover. Let me see if I can, I gotta pull it back a little bit. There we go. Okay. It's called Little Armageddon. And I think Northwestern did a great job with the cover. They're just a bunch of mayflies kind of dying. You know, they only live for like 5 hours or something one day. And they're all gathered around that intense light. And you know they're all going to drop dead in just a matter of minutes, really, or hours. So it's kind of a cool image. And the book really, the genesis of the book was a proposal that I wrote when I was applying for a Guggenheim Foundation grant. You know, I kind of said to the reviewers in my proposal, look, I've published a few books of poems already, and most of the poems are relatively serious. You know, they're kind of, I wouldn't say earnest necessarily, but they're kind of a wry wit maybe, but they're tackling pretty serious subjects. My first book was called Strange at Pieta, and it was about my brother Jonathan, who was born with spina bifida, and it was kind of, in some ways, you know, akin to what Yxta is working on in her book. You know, the book was kind of a resurrection of a person who's just kicked to the margin of society, right? He was a figure who could not come home from the hospital because he was so mentally and physically disabled, and was raised on the other side of the state of Pennsylvania by this beautiful organization of nuns who just took in these just folks who couldn't make it on their own and couldn't go home to their families. But he eventually got so much better that he came home when he was 18 years old, and it revolutionized our family. But you know, he was always the ghost in our house. He was always the boy who never came home. He was the youngest. I'm the oldest, and then my brother Tom, and then Jonathan never came home. So, you know, kind of in the same vein as Yxta's working, you know, there was always this erasure, always this absence that followed us around. And so, you know, my first book was kind of dealing with a lot of that psychological reality and the trauma of his birth and how my parents took it, which was not well. And well, it was tough stuff, you might say, sobering. My next book was called Answering the Ruins, and it was written in the aftermath of September 11th. I was in New York City then. I was teaching at St. John's University. The towers were, you know, crashed into by planes, and my students and I watched from a hill as they burned. And so, again, a kind of sobering, somber, grave subject, a lot of gravity. And then the breakup of a marriage came in the third book. And then so in my proposal, I'm saying to them, look, I'm gonna tackle something a little bit with a little bit more levity. And I'd become a father by that point. So I said, look, I think I'm going to try in this book to really introduce some humor and see what happens. I'm not really, especially versed in that, but we'll see how it goes. And I guess I intrigued them because they gave me the grant, and then I didn't have to teach it was like a year and a half. I didn't have to teach. So I had some time, and I felt a lot of pressure to sort of deliver. And I don't know if I did, but I worked, I had the time to work on the book. So that gives you a sense of this notion of little Armageddon, right? It's kind of like these, and we had twins. We had twins. So it was like, oh my God, I'm just being crushed by this new reality. And so it was like a little Armageddon, a beautiful overtaking, an apocalypse of joy in a way, but also terror, because I was 47 when the kids were born. My wife was, 30, 38. These are our first kids. We had no clue. And so I tried to capture some of that, I don't know, intensity and weirdness, but also comedy. So let's see I'll start with a poem called Hide and Seek. Okay, right? Hide and seek. We all know that game. Hide and seek. My kids, humped under the bedspread, look like a meal inside a python. Sometimes I wish my kids were a meal inside a python. Fatherhood, I sometimes think, is a python that swallowed me whole. Then I remember my wife is the python. She constricted me 3 years till I agreed to kids. I cannot thank her enough, though hardly thank her at all. It is frightening inside the python, dark and soundless and slick with digestion. It is beautiful inside the python, dark and silent and slick with time to think. I think parents must choose their testament, new or old, mercy or wrath. Some days I want to hide and seek forever inside the python, hide and seek more knowledge. Already I know a hole in the heart is not a hole in a sock, amenable to darning. I know python stems from Pytho, another name for Delphi. I'm not saying life without kids is life without pythons. I'm saying I've started to understand my parents. I'm saying I now know my mother's life was more than a wooden spoon and a fistful of salt. I'm saying my father's mind was more than a trip grenade. I'm saying 8, 9, 10, ready or not, here I come. So, I don't know, you can sort of see me trying to introduce something, sort of comical, but hopefully, illuminating at the same time. By the way, this is super weird reading to no faces and no sounds, but I'll just do my best. All right, so here again, we're going to try.
Love it, love it, love it, love it.
Great, thank you. So here we're going to try another one that sort of introduces some levity and hopefully moves us into a space of, I don't know, discovery or tenderness, maybe. I don't know. This one's called Very Tall Mushrooms. Very tall mushrooms. My son brings home a drawing from school that my wife thinks looks like 4 erect penises. I say they're just very tall mushrooms. Daddy dick, mommy dick, son dick, daughter dick, insists my wife. She believes all boys see the world in terms of dicks. Half of me agrees, the bottom half. The top consents to nothing. It believes in the pure autonomy of art, unfettered by the real. It believes in nonsense for the sake of sense. It believes you have to draw the line somewhere, and you mustn't draw the line anywhere. Very tall mushrooms, I say again, or maybe a family of lighthouses. This summer, our first real family trip, 6 Dantean hours to Hunting Island, whose lighthouse entered the National Register of Historic Places in 1970. Other visitors shot past the plaque out front, but I read it straight through, then told the kids I was 6 in 1970. Mom wasn't born. The 4 of us climbed reinforced cast iron, hand in hand, to stare at the Atlantic from 136 feet. When I hoisted my daughter for a better view, my wife swallowed a scream. That's where Babula lives, I said, pointing across the ocean. In perfect unison, the kids said, oh. My mother-in-law deplores America as deeply as she loves her grandkids. She sneers at our food and fashions, luxuriant lassitude. She thinks I kiss the children too much. If she read, she'd hate our books. Most appalling of all, our cemeteries, right out in the open. Because our city pool abuts a graveyard, she refuses to come swim. Pashli, Mama, I say, it's fun. A huge red sign outside the pool reads, children under 10 must be accompanied by an adult. I think the same should go for the graveyard. I think if any boy or girl not yet 10 has to die by whatever cause, then an adult should climb down in the hole as well. If my mother-in-law heard me say that, she'd tisk and start chopping cabbage for borscht. But if one of our kids died and needed an escort in dark, wet earth, she'd push my wife and me aside and leap. I love her for that. The first time the kids and I drove to the pool, my daughter asked about the rows of tombstones. I told her that's where the dead people live. The instant I said it, I knew it made no sense. Can they breathe underground? My son asked, the way fish can breathe underwater. No, I said, when you're dead, you stop breathing. Oh, said the kids. Remember what I said, never, ever try to breathe underwater like a fish. Okay, Dad, they said, racing for the blue. I look at the drawing again and tell my wife she's right. It's a family of dicks. They look happy, I tell her. I can see why you say mushrooms, she says. Alive and thriving and very tall. Okay, thank you. I can't hear you, but thank you. I see you're clapping. All right, so that's one dominant sort of approach in the book. And another kind of tracks my family history on my mother's side. Italian immigrants came over, during the big wave in the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century. So writing about becoming a father, becoming a parent is one aspect of the book, but also thinking about my parents' lives and their histories is another. So I'll read maybe a poem having to do with them, and then maybe a couple more, and I think that'll be it. So this one's called The Potato and the Marigold. Okay, the potato and the marigold, these are plants that are often grown together because the marigold apparently helps the potato grow and the potato helps the marigold grow. I can't remember where I read that. I'm not much of a gardener myself, although my father was a great gardener. But anyway, the potato and the marigold. So this is about my parents, who are elderly now. They're 80, living in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, which is where I grew up. Okay. The potato and the marigold. My parents have lived so long together, they have begun to look like fraternal twins. They stopped finishing each other's sentences decades back and now finish each other's coughs and bottles of prescription pills. They are such good friends after so many years. My father and mother have become two widows on a bench, swapping recipes and survivor guilt, and two old men playing endless chess on Sundays in the park. My father's skeleton is almost complete inside my mother's skin. Hers is just a few thoracic vertebrae shy of holding up each ounce of his fat and meat. No one noticed how they switched places bone by bone for 50 years. Lately, they finish each other's dreams. My mother wakes and slaps my father across the face for his smutty reveries, and he gives her a look that asks, "Can you blame me?" Then almost weeps at the colors of her sleep, the browns and charcoal grays. When the first one goes, the other will soon follow, like a little brother chasing an older sister down the sidewalk, or like a parent on the heels of a toddler about to topple headlong in a rose bush. His hairs spring from her ears, her breasts droop on his chest. He has learned from her there is no sky, it is all a blue illusion. She knows from him the world never comes to anything, it is already the world. Were they to part after all this time, he would become the river, thirsting for the salt of her sea. Were they to part, she would, no. My parents have been planted for good beside each other, the potato and the marigold. Dead and buried, they will entwine long roots again in a bed of dirt and call each other by each other's names. That's kind of a love poem, I suppose.
Incredible.
Thank you. So now here's another love poem. This one's called My Idea of Heaven. And this one appeared, so the first two poems I read appear in the middle of the book. And that one I just read is in the third section of the book. And then the last two poems I'll read come in the first section of the book. So this is the second poem in the collection, and it's called My Idea of Heaven. My idea of heaven is a cabin where I have moved my idea of a leather couch in front of my idea of a fireplace stacked with seasoned oak. From my idea of the tiny kitchen wafts the aroma of roasting lamb, spiced with my idea of sage and rosemary snipped from my idea of Eden. On my idea of a dining table breathes a vintage Chateauneuf-du-Pape, and beside me curls my idea of bliss with tresses discomposed and glowing cheek. Her eyes speak volumes of holy scripture, songs of songs, Kama Sutras, and hint that I am her idea of the goodliest man of men, sole partner and sole part of all these joys. The candles flit as we devour meat and new potatoes, cooked to my idea of perfection. Then we sprawl on the floor under quilts hand-stitched in cashmere. After, in my idea of flawless silence, my idea of smoke curls from my idea of the chimney into the starry night, all the way to another heaven, more sumptuous, more rapturous than this, which was never my idea, never mine at all. There were a couple quotes from poet John Milton in there from Paradise Lost, so a little nod to Adam and Eve. And that was a poem I wrote for my first wife, who is a Milton scholar. Many years after our breakup, but we're still incredibly close friends. We're actually collaborating on an anthology of disability literature right now. She's a really famous disability scholar, and to round back to an earlier conversation, she knew my brother Jonathan well, and his life inspired her to become a disability theorist. And this is the last poem I'll read. It's called Business. Business. A man hands me his business card and asks for mine. How should I know my business? The world is my business and the world is none of my business. These words are shadows of thoughts, shaped nothing like those thoughts. Am I a distortionist? My grief is the square root of my laughter that of my grief. Perhaps a mathematician. Maybe there is life on the other side of death. Maybe there's life on this side of death. Should I start a detective agency? Specialize in missing persons? The man who is all business, who keeps himself on the short leash of a necktie, pumps my hand and invites me to dine. With its strict dress code, the restaurant keeps a sports jacket at the coat check. Whose life hasn't been that jacket? Hung in shadow, furred with dust, waiting to be filled by another stranger. A man hands me his business card, asks for mine. How should I know my business? The world is my business and none of my business. In winter, wind scrapes up and down the walk, a blade across the sharpening stone. This, I think, is my business. Or blonde light sauntering in spring, the whole city on its arm. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to thank you both just for such a vibrant reading, and we can move into some questions in the chat if you'd like to.
Sounds good.
Can I just say, first of all, that Greg, your reading and your poems, you've done it like you did it.
Thank you.
You've done the work that you must have at some points felt like you had reached the moment that we're all reaching for, because you brought so many things together in those poems so that you really feel like you're touching that texture of life. It's just a stunning achievement.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I definitely agree with that sentiment. This first question is for Yxta, though. We have someone asking about the style of your novel, and they say it's really interesting and want to know what gave you the idea to put it together with different social media posts and, etc.
Right. So I wrote my book after a long silence of about 9 years, and I was having trouble coming back to writing fiction. And I went through a difficult couple of years where I finally realized it's time to come back and do it. But it turned out that the long period of silence had taught me a lot about the difficulty of making art. And as Greg was so sensitively describing before, the obstacles to finding your voice and expressing your voice. And I found that one of the safe spaces in order to write or make art can be found in these spaces on the web, and that you can wind up making art that vanishes or that gets very little notice. And so I wanted to write about silence and the strangling of art making and the ways in which you pivot and morph in order to find a crawl space in order to make that work. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. And Gregory, maybe you can speak to this too. I know someone in the chat is wondering how your collection you've presented here differs from your previous ones. Is there something about the process maybe that changed for you in evoking a different kind of affect?
That's a good question. And my answer is going to be pretty pedestrian, unfortunately. But my process hasn't really changed much since I started. I never really had training as a writer in college. I'm too darn old for there to be. There weren't really creative writing classes back then. You know, I was an English major, and you know, we read the canon, and that was it. And I wrote poems just the way all young people write poems, but you know, they were unspeakably bad. But I would bring them to my professors who weren't poets, and they, you know, they were encouraging, but what I wrote weren't anything to talk about. But after college, I went in the advertising industry and was a copywriter, and took my English writing skills into that field, which I had no experience there either. But pretty soon I got bored with that, and I started writing poems at work when I would finish my duties. And I realized that I needed to start reading other people's poems, contemporary poems, to figure out how to make these darn things. You know, otherwise they're going to sound like John Donne, you know, or John Milton or whoever. And so I started to read magazines, which I'd never done. I'd never read literary journals in any kind of earnest. And I just basically started to copy, you know, trying to learn the way a painter learns how to paint. So the first part of my process was just extensive reading and like trying to take little passages that I loved in these contemporary poets and sort of put my own spin on it. Like I would write down a line from, I don't know, Sharon Olds or whatever. And I would think like, okay, how can I kind of tweak that so that it sounds cool and it sort of fits my world so I can speak with some authority. And that's all I've done ever since. I've been writing poems for 35 years, I think. And that's pretty much the way I do it still. And then so what I'll do is I'll get these little bits, you know, that I've come up with, and I'll just gather them up. I used to put them on little sheets of paper and put them in a, this is ridiculous, but I would put them in a Ziploc bag, and I would pull them out and like write that line where it was pulled out. And then I would pull out another one and see if it fit after that one. And I would try to cobble together these little puzzles. And usually they were kind of nonsensical, but they would often give me an idea to get going on a project. And I still kind of do it that way. You know, this was in the age kind of before computers, but I still do it that way. It wasn't until years later that I studied with a poet named Derek Walcott. And that was his way of doing it too, he told me. And I was like, wow, he won the Nobel Prize. So I guess I got lucky figuring out this weird process. So I think the process has been the same, but to sort of do justice to the question, I think this fourth book was a book where I returned to the notion of a subject that I was going to try to deal with ahead of time, which I usually don't like to do. That usually freezes me up as a writer. But in my first book, I devoted that to my brother Jonathan, and in this book, I mostly devoted to my fathering, this late fatherhood. But it kind of became a hodgepodge in my typical way. Most of my books are pretty slapdash in terms of their subjects. They skip around a lot, kind of like in the reading, you know. I mean, hide and seek and very tall mushrooms, you know, they have to do with the family. Then some about my parents, and then, you know, something about a love poem, and then this thing about the businessman. You know, it's a little all over the place in a way. I don't know if that answers the question. I'm so sorry if it didn't.
No, that was a wonderful answer. And I'm wondering now, based on other questions in the chat, Yxta, people are wondering, in terms of your inspiration and process, Do you relate to the characters in your novel? And
Oh yeah,
okay, how does that work for you?
just like a constantly, unbottling rage and anxiety is what my character is constantly navigating. And like this effort to be an artist and to make art is really, once you get over, and I don't know, maybe Greg can speak to this as well. Once you get over the initial discovery of it and the initial hump of it, you actually realize it's going to become a kind of career for you. And you have to develop this stamina and this faith in the face of so much rejection, social and professional, just lambasting and silence. And you have to just keep moving. And so I really relate to that aspect of my character. And like I said, I stopped writing for a while, in part because I just couldn't, I needed a break from it. And I was doing all this law stuff, which is my career. I'm a law professor and it's great and I love it. And yeah, so Amanda's not a lawyer, but I relate to that kinetic fury that she's constantly managing and kind of breathing into her art, fire breathing into her art. But thank you so much for that question.
I might add just a little bit to that. There's a passage very early on in Yxta's book, and I'm going to read it because I think it answers the question. The narrator at this point says, "I already realized that if I didn't make art all the time, I would probably die from loneliness and insanity." And it's a little bit tongue in cheek because the narrator is so sassy, but I think it just really strikes home and is absolutely literal too. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
thank you so much for quoting from my book. But I wonder how many people identify with that. I know that Greg must.
Yeah, I do. Absolutely.
Yeah, that art making is a way of proceeding through the world and surviving the world. Art that is so necessary for all of humanity, but the paradox, and at the same time, it's so devalued and so ignored by our social structures. But yeah, it seems to be a necessary part for getting through this thing called life. That's great.
That's a really beautiful answer from both of you. One last question actually for Gregory that I think speaks to another kind of paradox maybe. We have someone asking about the poem about your parents that you shared with us, and they're wondering about the positivity and the negativity that are sort of competing in that work, and wondering if you can speak to that a bit.
Can I quote this line that was blowing my mind? Did I get it right? I don't know if you noticed, I was like writing notes the whole time. My father's skeleton is almost complete in my mother's skin. Did I quote that right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
That is incredible. So I want to hear your answer because you have.
No, you keep going.
You've done it. I mean, well, so, and also how his hairs are on her ears, or yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And her breasts are drooping on his chest because they're the potato and the marigold.
They're old.
It was you got it. You got it, Greg. Let's tell us about it.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, but if you haven't, you must go look him up. He's one of the greatest poets of all time, of any century, but one of the greatest of the 20th century, easily. I mean, Pablo Neruda, he's at that level. Yehuda Amichai is that level of poet, absolutely phenomenal. And he once said that happiness is boring. Okay. So I kind of quote him here to answer that question. Like, it's absolutely essential, but it needs to be counterbalanced, right? So the question had to do with positivity and negativity, right? And for the two of them to find their character and find their specificity, they need each other. It's a mutually dependent kind of arrangement in just the way the potato and the marigold are, right? So that's why I think the question is so astute, because it sees that in that poem, right? But you couldn't put your finger on, well, the marigold represents the positive and the potato represents it's just all blurry back and forth in this kind of like ricocheting way, right? Because, you know, that's the way the world works. That's the way the mind works. That's the way the heart works. That's the way the soul works. That's the way language works. And Wittgenstein said that himself. It's just, there's an overabundance. There's never singularity. It's always dialogical. You know, Native American culture had their hand on this. Everything is interwoven. You can't separate anything out. And so whenever I, you know, get enraptured by a piece of writing of my own that seems too happy, I realize this is just dreck. And I remember Yehuda Amichai, happiness is boring, but his poems are beautiful and they will bring such joy to you. And yet it's not just unidimensional, not monotonal or monological. Yeah, that's my stab at it.
That's, I think, a wonderful insight for this moment and maybe for us to wrap up with. And so I'd just like to thank you both again on behalf of the Global Voices program for your really engaging reading. And I'd like to thank everyone else for joining us tonight. I'd like to remind everyone too that you can purchase both books that you heard from today at the Seminary Co-op Bookstores. And you can access a recording of this talk at the iHouse website, which is ihouse.uchicago.edu. And you can also learn about our upcoming programs at that web address. So thank you both for such a wonderful reading. We'll look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Seminary Co-op. Thank you, iHouse. Thank you, everybody who came. We miss you.
Thank you, Yxta. It was great reading with
Thank
you.
you, Greg.
An amazing night. Thank you so much.
Super, made my week.
Me too. It was
All
great
right,
fun.
guys.
Thank you, Renee.